So imagine you were looking up at the night sky, right? Pointing at a really bright twinkling star.
Yeah, standard stargazing.
Exactly. But then realizing that almost everything you have been taught about where that star actually is, well, it's nothing more than a mathematical illusion.
It is wild. Today we are exploring this really radical, highly provocative critique of modern physics.
Yeah, an argument that suggests our entire foundational understanding of the universe might be compromised by this massive collective blind spot.
Right. And it is a genuinely disruptive premise. I mean, the sources we are analyzing today, they argue that for over a century, physicists have basically confused physical reality with a bug in their own cognitive processing.
And we are going to look specifically at how that, what the text calls a cognitive procedural error.
Which is basically a flaw in how we structurally process information.
Right, how that exact flaw might have completely distorted modern physics. We are going to unpack why the very coordinate systems we use to map reality might be, projecting this optical illusion onto literally everything, from relativity all the way to quantum mechanics.
Yeah, which really forces us to critically examine the actual tools we use to define the laws of nature.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
But before we jump into all that, I want to state something very explicitly to you, the listener. We are exploring a highly specific, heterodox critique from our provided texts today.
Yeah, we have to be clear about that.
Exactly. Our goal here is absolutely not to take a side. We aren't here to casually debunk Albert Einstein or, tear down a century of established science.
No.
We are simply taking this specific source material, pulling it apart, and trying to impartially convey the ideas inside it. We just want to see the universe through this alternative lens and understand the structural argument being made.
Because exploring a radical perspective like this is just an incredible exercise in critical thinking.
Yeah.
It often helps us better understand the bedrock of what we currently accept as true just by, viewing it from an entirely alien angle.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. What is the core mechanism of this argument? Because the text makes a very sharp distinction between the truth of the universe and this bug in our cognitive processing.
Right.
So what exactly is the bug?
Well, the central thesis of our sources is that physics relies on these math-obsessed coordinate systems that completely ignore the physical time delay of light reaching an observer's eye.
Okay.
The text points to a concept called orthogonal projection.
Let's define that. What does an orthogonal projection actually look like in practice?
So think of a traditional Cartesian graph. Your standard X, Y, and Z axes on a piece of graph paper. Or even the Minkowski space-time diagrams they use in relativity.
Sure, the stuff you see in high school physics.
Exactly. These mathematical frameworks operate from what we might call a God's eye view.
A God's eye view.
Yeah. They assume a perspective looking down at the entire universe from the outside where you can essentially plot all events at all points simultaneously.
Oh, I get it. So on a graph, if I plot a supernova happening at, say, x equals 10, and then a planetary collision happening way over at x equals -10.
For the exact same moment in time.
Yeah, the graph just accepts that as a state of reality. It assumes I possess the magical ability to see both of those extremely distant events instantly.
And that is the core issue. The sources call this the Newton hangover.
The Newton hangover. I love that phrasing.
Right, because back in Isaac Newton's era, there was this unconscious, universally accepted belief in action at a distance.
Because humanity didn't yet understand electromagnetism, right? Or the finite speed of light.
Exactly. So people just functioned as if information about the universe was instantly available everywhere at once. If a star shifted its position, the assumption was that the rest of the universe instantly knew it.
It's like watching a live sports broadcast, but completely forgetting that there is a satellite transmission delay.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like you think the batter is swinging at the exact millisecond you see it happen on your living room screen. But in physical reality, that event already occurred.
It's already in the past.
Right. The information just took time to travel through the stadium cameras, up to a satellite, through the cables, and finally into your television.
That is a highly accurate analogy for the source's argument. The viewer at home is confusing the moment of perception with the moment of physical occurrence.
But I have to push back here for a second, because didn't Einstein specifically introduce the speed of light limit to fix this exact problem?
That's a very common question.
I mean, the whole point of relativity is establishing that nothing travels faster than light, right? Which creates that universal speed limit for information.
It is a vital distinction to make, and this is exactly where the source's critique targets the actual math. Yeah. The text argues that while Einstein did establish that the speed of light is finite and constant, he took that delayed light and forced it to fit onto a theoretical canvas that still functions from that instantaneous God's eye view.
Wait, so he acknowledged the delay, but mapped it onto a grid that structurally refuses to acknowledge the delay.
Precisely.
How does that actually work in the math?
Well, according to the sources, Einstein and Hendrik Lorentz before him, they encountered situations where the finite speed of light completely contradicted the neat, rigid grids of their coordinate systems.
Right.
But instead of throwing away the grid and saying, hey, this orthogonal projection doesn't work for a reality where information is delayed.
Which would mean throwing out the foundational math.
Right. Instead of doing that, they mathematically fudged the coordinates to make the equations balance.
When you say they fudged the coordinates, what does that practically mean? Did they alter the actual physical dimensions of objects in the math?
Yes, they utilized matrix calculations to stretch and compress the values.
Yeah.
Rather than plotting physical objects in real moving space, they turned physical space into this abstract algebraic grid. And by manipulating that grid, they created concepts like length contraction and time dilation.
Which are huge pillars of physics.
Huge pillars. But the text argues that physicists essentially mutated space and time mathematically, just to force their formulas to work out on their theoretical canvas.
So they treated the delay of light as a physical warping of the universe itself.
Exactly. Rather than recognizing it as a simple cognitive procedural error, just a bug in how a static geometric grid processes moving light.
Okay, so the map becomes the territory. They basically blamed the universe for warping, instead of blaming their graph paper for being structurally inadequate.
That is the absolute crux of the argument. And if the math on paper is fundamentally fudged, that implies our understanding of real-world physical phenomena is severely contaminated by this error.
That's heavy. So if they fudge the math on paper, that must mean our real-world physical tests and, famous thought experiments are also carrying this contamination. Right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Let's talk about the moving train, because the text uses this to show exactly how the mathematical fudge distorts physical reality.
The classic light clock thought experiment. It is totally foundational to teaching relativity.
Right. For anyone who needs a quick refresher, the standard thought experiment goes like this. You have a train moving incredibly fast, and inside the train, a beam of light bounces straight up from the floor to the ceiling.
Right.
To someone standing perfectly still inside the train, the light goes straight up and straight down.
But to a stationary observer standing on the platform outside, the train is moving forward while the light is traveling up.
Right, they see the motion.
So, according to the established view, the observer on the platform sees the light travel in a diagonal line.
And because a diagonal line covers more distance than a straight vertical line, the light has to travel a longer path.
Exactly.
Since the speed of light is constant, conventional physics tells us that time must actually be moving slower inside the train to make the math balance out.
That is the widely accepted model. But our sources bring a pretty radical reality check to this scenario. They call that diagonal line a fantasy trajectory.
Wait, I have to stop you there. A fantasy trajectory.
Yes.
If I am standing on the platform watching a glass train go by, I physically see the light move diagonally with the train. Like it traces a diagonal path across my field of vision. How is what I am seeing a fantasy?
Because you are seeing the delayed result of light hitting your eye, not the actual physical geometric transit of the photon in real space.
Okay, my brain hurts a little. Unpack that.
Let's put some specific numbers to it, just as the text does. Imagine the train is moving to the right at 0.6 c, so 60% of the speed of light.
Got it.
Now, a photon shoots straight up from the floor at 1 c, the speed of light. The traditional matrix calculations assume this photon travels diagonally and perfectly hits the exact same target atom on the moving ceiling.
Okay, I follow the setup. The light hits the ceiling.
But physically, consider the transit time. While that photon is physically traveling from the floor to the ceiling, the target atom on the ceiling is actively moving away.
Oh.
Right. By the time the photon reaches the top, the ceiling has shifted 0.6 units to the right. The light physically cannot hit the same spot on the ceiling that it was originally aimed at.
I see where the disconnect is. The ceiling is physically sliding away while the light is in transit, but the math assumes the target politely waits for the light to arrive.
Yes. The text argues that physicists drew a fake diagonal line using algebraic grid forcing. They basically used abstract math to force the light to hit the target, completely ignoring the physical reality of relative motion.
And the actual transit time of the photon.
Exactly. The source claims that such a diagonal light trajectory simply does not physically exist. It is a mathematical illusion created by trusting the coordinate system over the physical geometry.
Man, it's like aiming a laser pointer at a moving car on the highway and doing the map as if the car is going to freeze in place while the beam of light travels toward it.
That's a really good way to visualize it.
And the text takes us a step further, right? By going after the Michelson-Morley experiment, which is essentially the holy grail physical experiment that led to relativity.
Yeah, the Michelson-Morley experiment from the late 19th century is pivotal. They used an interferometer, which is a device with mirrors positioned on different arms to bounce light beams back and forth.
Right, and the goal was to see if the Earth's movement through space affected the speed of light.
Exactly.
And they found that it didn't. The light always returned to the sensor at the exact same time, regardless of which direction the Earth was moving.
Which was a massive shock.
Yeah, it was a huge shock to the scientific community and eventually led to the conclusion that the speed of light is a universal constant. But our sources claim there's a massive physical blind spot hidden in how that experiment was conducted.
A physical blind spot involving the manual adjustment of the mirrors.
Wait, manual adjustment?
Yes. To get a readable result from an interferometer, scientists have to physically tune the device. They adjust the microscopic distances of the mirrors until they get a clear interference fringe.
Okay, let's clarify what an interference fringe is for a moment for anyone who doesn't know.
Sure. Imagine dropping 2 pebbles into a still pond at the exact same time and watching the circular ripples expand.
Okay.
Where those ripples crash into each other and overlap, they create a specific pattern. That is an interference pattern. In the experiment, they tune the mirrors so the light waves overlap perfectly to create a clean, measurable pattern.
And the sources claim that by making that delicate physical adjustment, while the Earth was actively hurtling through space at thousands of miles an hour,
Yes.
the scientists were unknowingly compensating for the light's travel time.
Think about the physical mechanics. The light traveling in the direction of the Earth's motion has to chase the forward mirror, which takes slightly longer.
Right, because the mirror's running away from it.
Exactly. And the light bouncing back meets the mirror halfway, taking slightly less time. By tuning the mirrors to force the ripples to align perfectly while in motion, they physically warped the symmetry of the device.
Whoa. So the source argues that if you could somehow step outside the experiment, free from the Earth's motion, and look at the true physical shape of that tuned mirror arrangement,
It wouldn't be a perfect circle anymore.
it would be a teardrop.
Yes, a distorted teardrop shape. The geometry of the physical setup itself was manually warped to hide the time delay of light.
That is wild.
And because physicists didn't realize they were doing this, they assumed space and time themselves must be warping to keep the speed of light constant.
Okay, so if this macro-level illusion fundamentally warps how we understand trains and mirrors, does this scale down to the quantum level?
It absolutely does.
Because the distance between an electron and a sensor is microscopic, but the speed of light is still finite. Does this cognitive error infect quantum mechanics too?
The text asserts that it does. It calls it a direct contagion, a blind spot that quantum mechanics inherited directly from special relativity.
Oh, wow.
And to understand the mechanism of how this works, the source uses an excellent analogy involving fighter jets.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Imagine 3 fighter jets parked in a straight line on a runway. Front, middle, and back. They're all completely stationary.
Right.
The middle jet sends out a radio signal. Because the environment is static, the signal hits the front jet and the back jet at the exact same physical moment.
Right. That makes intuitive sense. The distances are equal and nothing is moving.
Now, imagine the entire runway, or in the real world, the Earth itself is moving through space. If the jets are moving forward as a single unit and the middle jet sends a signal, those signals will not arrive simultaneously.
Because the jets are in motion relative to the expanding signal.
Exactly. The jet in the back is moving toward the expanding signal, so it intercepts it sooner. The jet in the front is moving away from the expanding signal, so the signal has to chase it, arriving later.
That completely shifts the variables. Information delay fundamentally changes depending on the baseline motion of the environment you are in.
And here is the application to quantum mechanics.
Okay, lay it on me.
According to the sources, when quantum physicists measure a subatomic particle, like an electron, they are using physical measuring devices, sensors, cameras, laboratories that are actively moving through the universe.
Because the Earth is moving.
Right. They might be moving at, say, 0.6 C relative to the broader electromagnetic field. But modern physics gives them a free pass to treat the measuring device's baseline speed as 0.
They zero out the speedometer of the laboratory itself. They literally isolate the room from the physical reality of its movement through space.
Yes, and by treating a moving laboratory as a stationary God's eye grid, they break the underlying math.
Wow.
The text gives a highly specific example regarding kinetic energy to prove this.
Walk us through the energy error.
Let's say you want to accelerate an electron. Accelerating an electron from a complete standstill from 0 to 0.1 C requires a very specific amount of baseline energy. But accelerating that same electron from 0.6 C to 0.7 C requires a vastly different amount of energy. Kinetic energy is not linear, it compounds.
I can use a real-world analogy to ground this, actually.
Go for it.
It is like driving a car. Pressing the gas pedal to go from 0 to 10 miles per hour takes a relatively small amount of work from the engine.
Right.
But if you are already hurtling down the highway at 100 miles per hour, pushing the car to 110 takes significantly more energy because you are fighting compounded air resistance and momentum.
Yeah.
The baseline speed you are starting from matters immensely to the energy required.
That beautifully illustrates the physics. Now, apply that exact mechanism to the quantum level.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Because the math-obsessed orthogonal coordinate system allows the physicists to completely ignore the baseline velocity of their measuring device.
Treating that 0.6 C movement as if it were a clean zero.
Exactly. They mathematically treat the energy change of going from 0.6 C to 0.7 C as identical to going from 0 to 0.1 C.
Oh, wow. So they are fundamentally miscalculating the energy dynamics required to move subatomic particles.
According to the source, yes. By failing to account for the baseline speed of the apparatus and the time delay of information, they are creating a massive blind spot in our understanding of atomic and molecular orbits.
That is huge.
The text asserts that you cannot correctly calculate the orbital mechanics of a hydrogen or oxygen molecule, like how much energy binds them together, if you are relying on a coordinate system that pretends the laboratory is sitting perfectly still.
It is genuinely unsettling to think that our bedrock theories might just be artifacts of how we drew the map.
It really is.
But it is always easier to tear down a theory than it is to build a new one.
Very true.
If this God's eye coordinate system is structurally broken, what replaces it? How should we be mapping the universe?
This is perhaps the most fascinating part of the source material. The author's proposed solution doesn't come from a modern supercomputer or a particle accelerator.
Oh, where does it come from?
It is adapted from 16th century art.
Wait, really? Art?
Yeah. Specifically, the Renaissance artist Albrecht Dürer and his invention of the perspective grid.
Oh. The source heavily references Dürer's famous woodcut drawing. Draftsman making a perspective drawing of a reclining woman.
That's the one.
If you haven't seen it, picture a scene. You have an artist sitting at a table. Between the artist and his subject, which is a woman reclining on a table, there is a vertical wooden frame.
Right.
The frame has a grid of strings pulled tightly across it. The artist has his eye fixed at one single stationary point, looking through that string grid, and he is drawing exactly what he sees onto his 2D paper, square by square.
It represents the birth of true visual perspective in art. And the physics application the text draws from this is incredibly profound.
Okay, so lay it out for us.
Think about the physical mechanism of light traveling from the woman to the artist's eye.
Okay, let's break down the light path.
The light reflecting off the woman's shoulder and the light reflecting off her foot arrive at the artist's eye, that single local point of observation at the exact same time.
Right. That simultaneous arrival is what creates the 2D image in his mind.
But because her foot is physically much farther away from the artist's eye than her shoulder is, the light from her foot had to physically depart slightly earlier than the light from her shoulder in order for them to arrive together.
Oh, I see. So a single moment of perception is actually a mashup of different moments in the past.
Precisely. And this is the structural foundation of the new coordinate system the source proposes. True physics, they argue, cannot be plotted on a 3D God's eye grid where you pretend everything is happening now.
Right.
You cannot use an orthogonal projection that ignores the transit time of light.
Because the now you perceive is an illusion made of staggered, delayed pasts.
Yeah.
But how does this artistic concept actually translate into replacing something like Einstein's Minkowski space-time diagrams?
Good question.
How do we use this mathematically?
Think of it like a chronological topographical map. A standard topographical map uses contour lines to show you physical elevation, the height of mountains and valleys. The Dürer solution proposes a map where the contour lines represent time depth.
Time depth.
Yeah. You must map reality backwards from the moment the light hits the retina or the camera or the quantum sensor. The source calls this the 2D cut plane.
So instead of mapping physical space, we are mapping the delay of information.
Yes. You start with the simultaneous arrival of light at the sensor, and you mathematically untangle it based on how long it took to get there. By doing this, you inherently build the baseline motion of the laboratory into the geometry itself.
Which acts as a proof of concept for the quantum energy problem we discussed earlier.
Exactly.
If we use this 2D cut plane mapping, we aren't pretending the lob is sitting at 0 anymore. We are mathematically accounting for the moving sensor, which organically resolved that 0.6C versus 0.7C energy discrepancy without needing to fudge the numbers.
That is exactly how it functions. The author synthesizes all of this to make their ultimate point.
Which is,
If we adopt this perspective-based spatial recognition, if we actually build the time depth of light into our geometric foundations, we can gently retire special relativity.
wow, just retire it.
Yeah. We wouldn't need mathematical workarounds like length contraction anymore because the delay is native to the map. And crucially, we could finally build quantum mechanics on a realistic foundation that physically accounts for the movement of the measuring devices.
Okay, let's summarize the narrative we've traced today because we covered a lot of ground.
We really did.
We started by exploring how a cognitive procedural error mistaking a static God's eye graph for physical reality has potentially distorted physics for a century.
And we examine how applying that instantaneous grid to a universe with delayed information leads to fantasy trajectories in light clocks.
And physical warps like the teardrop shape in interferometer mirrors.
Right. We saw how that same optical illusion scales down to the micro level, potentially causing physicists to miscalculate quantum energy dynamics because they isolate their moving laboratories from reality.
And finally, we looked at how adopting Albrecht Dürer's 2D perspective techniques, treating observation points as chronological topographical maps, might be the key to structurally untangling all the math.
It is a sweeping mechanical critique that really demands we look very closely at the unexamined assumptions built into our tools.
And I think this connects directly back to you listening to this deep dive right now.
Definitely.
Obviously, most of us are not spending our afternoons calculating the orbital mechanics of hydrogen atoms.
Probably not.
But whether you are analyzing a massive data set for your business, writing complex lines of code, or just trying to navigate a multifaceted decision in your daily life, this is a phenomenal reminder to question the coordinate systems you use to view your own world.
It translates into a very practical framework for decision-making.
Exactly. Ask yourself, are you looking at a situation from a theoretical God's eye view, assuming you possess all the facts simultaneously? Or are you actively accounting for the delay in how information reaches you? Are you remembering that the data you are looking at on your screen might have departed from its source a long time ago and the variables might have already moved?
It requires an entirely different level of situational awareness. And if we connect this structural critique back to the vastness of the cosmos, it leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to ponder.
What's that?
Well, if our entire foundational understanding of the universe, from the invisible behavior of subatomic particles to the distant edges of black holes, all the way back to the mechanics of the Big Bang itself, is filtered through coordinate systems that might just be projecting a 2D sensory illusion into 3D space.
Yeah.
What else in our reality is just a math-obsessed trick of the light? If the bedrock of modern physics can be warped by a cognitive procedural error, how much of what we confidently call the absolute truth of the universe is really just a beautifully drawn perspective trick?
Man, now there is a thought to leave you looking differently at the next piece of graph paper or starry night sky you see. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.